When the James Webb Space Telescope captured an image from the deepest reaches of space, scientists expected to see ancient galaxies from the early universe. What they found defied everything we knew about existence itself. A galaxy, pristine and fully formed, dating back further than the Big Bang, older than time. As a secret team studied the impossible image, they discovered something more unsettling. Patterns in the light, mathematical sequences too precise to be natural. Someone had left a message woven into the fabric of space-time. Soon, strange phenomena rippled through our world. Time slipping backward, memories rewriting, glimpses of realities that shouldn't exist. What happens when we decode a message never meant as a warning, but an invitation? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The coffee was still hot when Dr. Eleanor Vance arrived at the Johns Hopkins Observatory, just as it had been every morning for the past 30 years. She liked the quiet hours before dawn, when the building held only the hum of computers and the distant whisper of telescopes tracking their endless patrol of the heavens. At 58, Eleanor had earned the right to keep her own hours, though most assumed her dedication came from ambition rather than habit. She set her leather satchel on the desk, the same one she'd carried since graduate school, its corners worn smooth by decades of use. Inside lay her research journal, a thick notebook filled with handwritten observations and sketches of cosmic phenomena. In an age of digital everything, Eleanor preferred the tactile connection of pen on paper. The way writing by hand forced her to think more carefully about each word. The office window faced east, and she watched the sky lighten from black to deep blue, that liminal moment when stars began to fade, but daylight hadn't quite arrived. These transitions had always fascinated her. The boundaries between things, the places where one state became another. Her colleague Dr. Marcus Chen would arrive in an hour. They'd worked together for 15 years, ever since he'd joined the department as a young cosmologist, fresh from Cambridge. Marcus brought an energy to their partnership that balanced Eleanor's more methodical approach. Where she moved carefully through data, he leaped to connections, his mind constantly racing ahead to implications and possibilities. Eleanor's husband, Thomas, used to joke that she'd married the universe before she'd married him. He hadn't been entirely wrong. Even now, 5 years after his death, she sometimes caught herself starting to tell him about a new discovery before remembering he wasn't there to hear it. The grief had dulled to a steady ache, manageable but always present, like the background radiation left over from the Big Bang itself. Her daughter Rachel lived in Seattle now, working in tech, a world as foreign to Eleanor as Eleanor's work had been to her own parents. They spoke every few months, conversations that felt rehearsed, careful. The distance between them had grown slowly, imperceptibly, the way galaxies drift apart in an expanding universe. After Thomas died, Eleanor had thrown herself even deeper into work, and Rachel had stopped trying to pull her out. She opened her journal to a fresh page and dated it carefully. Monday, October 27th, 2025. The morning light was stronger now, painting the observatory's instruments in shades of amber and gold. Eleanor had spent her career studying the cosmic microwave background, that faint afterglow of the universe's birth, searching for patterns in the noise, clues to how everything began. There was a comfort in cosmology, in questions so vast that no single human life could answer them. You became part of a chain of inquiry stretching back centuries and forward into an unknown future. Your observations would outlive you, data points in someone else's breakthrough decades after you were gone. The computer chimed softly, an encrypted email arriving in her secure inbox. Eleanor frowned. She rarely received classified communications anymore. Her active security clearance was a relic from consulting work she'd done for NASA years ago, kept current more out of bureaucratic inertia than necessity. The sender was Dr. Sarah Beckman, NASA's Director of Astrophysics. Eleanor had met her a few times at conferences, respected her sharp mind and political savvy. The email was brief. Dr. Vance, requesting your immediate consultation on matter of highest priority. Transportation arranged. Details will be provided upon arrival at facility. Please confirm availability within 24 hours. This concerns recent JWST findings. Utmost discretion required. Eleanor read it twice, her coffee forgotten and cooling. JWST, the James Webb Space Telescope. She'd followed its mission closely, marveled at the images it had sent back, galaxies from the universe's first billion years rendered in stunning detail. But what could require such urgency and secrecy? She thought about her schedule, the lectures she had planned, the graduate students depending on her guidance. She thought about the comfortable routine she'd built, the predictable rhythm of her days. Then she thought about Thomas, how he'd always encouraged her to take chances, to say yes to the unknown. Eleanor's fingers hovered over the keyboard. Outside, the sun had fully risen, burning away the last of the night. Somewhere above, invisible in the daylight, the James Webb Telescope maintained its lonely vigil at the second Lagrange point, 1,000,000 miles from Earth, staring back toward the beginning of time. She typed a response. Confirmed. Ready to depart immediately? Her hand trembled slightly as she hit send, though whether from anticipation or apprehension, she couldn't quite say. The black SUV arrived at Eleanor's apartment before sunrise the next morning. No government plates, no identifying marks, just tinted windows and a driver who said nothing beyond confirming her name. She'd packed a single bag, not knowing how long she'd be gone, and left a note for Marcus on her office door. Called away. Cover my Tuesday lecture. They drove for 2 hours, leaving Baltimore behind, heading into rural Maryland where the roads narrowed and trees pressed close on both sides. Eventually, they turned onto an unmarked access road that wound through dense forest before arriving at a gate that looked more suitable for a military installation than a research facility. Guards checked credentials, and the SUV passed through 3 more checkpoints before finally stopping at a low concrete building that seemed designed to be invisible from above. Dr. Sarah Beckman met her in the lobby. A woman in her mid-40s with silver-streaked hair pulled back severely, dark circles under her eyes, suggesting she hadn't slept properly in days. They shook hands, and Beckman's grip was firm but brief. "Thank you for coming so quickly," Beckman said, already walking toward an elevator. "You're the last to arrive. I'll brief everyone together." The elevator descended for what felt like 3 floors. When the doors opened, Eleanor stepped into a corridor that reminded her of photographs she'd seen of CERN or Los Alamos. All white walls and fluorescent lighting, the air climate controlled to a sterile coolness. Beckman led her to a conference room where 3 others waited. Eleanor recognized Marcus immediately. He stood when he saw her, surprise and relief crossing his face. "Eleanor, I should have known they'd call you too." "You didn't mention anything," she said. "Wasn't allowed. They contacted me 2 days ago." He gestured to the others. "This is Dr. James Torres and Dr. Amara Okonkwo." James Torres was perhaps 40, with weathered hands and the slightly disheveled appearance of someone who spent more time in laboratories than social situations. "A quantum physicist from MIT, Marcus whispered. "One of the best minds in theoretical physics, though he avoided the spotlight." Amara Okonkwo was younger, maybe 35, with an elegant bearing and eyes that seemed to calculate probabilities as she assessed Eleanor. "A mathematician and cryptographer," Marcus added, "recruited from the Institute for Advanced Study, published groundbreaking work on pattern recognition in complex systems." They settled around the conference table as Beckman dimmed the lights and activated a screen. The image that appeared made Eleanor's breath catch. It was a galaxy, rendered in the infrared spectrum that was JWST's specialty, glowing with ethereal beauty against the darkness of deep space. Spiral arms spread out in perfect symmetry, stars clustered in regions of active formation, the whole structure so detailed it seemed close enough to touch. "This is Jade's GSZ-14-0, Beckman began. "Captured by the James Webb Space Telescope 6 weeks ago during a deep field survey. The spectroscopic data indicates a redshift that places this galaxy at 13.9 billion light-years away. Eleanor frowned. That's barely after the Big Bang. Universe is only 13.8 billion years old. Exactly, Beckman said quietly. The room fell silent. James leaned forward, studying the image with intensity. Amara's fingers tapped a silent rhythm on the table, already working through calculations. That's impossible, Marcus finally said. We've checked the data 17 times, Beckman replied. Verified the calibrations, ruled out every possible error. The measurements are solid. This galaxy existed 100 million years before the universe began. Eleanor felt the foundation of her understanding shift. The same sensation she'd experienced once during a small earthquake in California, the ground proving less solid than assumed. She studied the galaxy, its elegant spiral structure suggesting billions of years of evolution, of stars living and dying, of matter organizing itself into increasingly complex patterns. You said recent JWST finding, Eleanor said slowly. Plural, there's more. Beckman changed the image. A spectral analysis appeared, showing light wavelengths broken down into their component frequencies. Amara stood abruptly, moving closer to the screen. Those patterns, she breathed. Those aren't random. No, Beckman agreed. They're not random at all. Eleanor saw it then, what Amara had spotted immediately. Regularities in the spectrum, repetitions that shouldn't occur naturally, mathematical relationships too precise to be coincidence. The light from this impossible galaxy carried structure, intentionality. Someone engineered this, James said, his voice barely above a whisper. Beckman looked at each of them in turn. That's what you're here to determine. You have full access to all JWST data, unlimited computing resources, and complete autonomy in your investigation. But this project is classified at the highest level. You tell no one what you're working on. Not colleagues, not family, not anyone. As far as the outside world knows, you're on sabbatical. Eleanor thought of her office at Johns Hopkins, her students, the comfortable life she'd built. Then she looked at the image again, at this impossible galaxy that shouldn't exist, carrying light that might not be natural. How long do we have? She asked. As long as it takes, Beckman said. But I'd prefer it to be soon. We're not the only ones who've noticed something strange in the data. They spent the first week living with the data, each approaching it from their particular discipline, circling the problem like astronomers mapping an unknown planet from different angles. The facility provided everything they needed, quarters that were comfortable if sterile, a cafeteria that never closed, and most importantly, access to computing power that would have made Eleanor's university colleagues weep with envy. The conference room became their war room. Screens covered every wall, displaying the galaxy from a dozen different perspectives: infrared, ultraviolet, spectroscopic analysis, three-dimensional reconstructions. Marcus had printed the spectral analysis on long sheets of paper that now covered an entire table, covered with his annotations in red ink. Eleanor stood before the main image, coffee growing cold in her hands, studying the galaxy as she had every morning since arriving. Juddis GS Zaid 14-0. The designation felt inadequate for something so beautiful and impossible. The spiral structure was too perfect, too mature. Galaxies this old should be irregular, chaotic, still forming from the primordial gas of the early universe. This looked like a galaxy that had existed for billions of years. The physics doesn't work, James said, joining her. He'd brought his own coffee, plus a notebook filled with equations in handwriting so cramped it was nearly illegible. Even if we ignore the timing problem, the redshift measurements, everything, the structure itself is wrong. Galaxies this mature need time. Stars must form, live out their life cycles, die, spread heavy elements through supernovae. New generations of stars form from that enriched material. It's a process that takes billions of years. But the spectroscopic data shows heavy elements, Eleanor replied. Carbon, oxygen, iron, the signature is clear. Exactly. Which means either our understanding of stellar evolution is completely wrong, or this galaxy somehow skipped billions of years of natural development. Marcus looked up from his printouts, pushing his glasses up his nose. or it existed outside our timeline and somehow intersected with our observable universe at this particular point. Eleanor felt a chill despite the climate-controlled air. "That's quite a leap, Marcus. Is it? Look at these patterns." He gestured to the spectral lines, pointing out regularities he'd circled in red. Every 47 nanometers, there's a peak that shouldn't be there. It's not corresponding to any known element or molecular transition. And the spacing is too precise. Natural phenomena don't work in such exact intervals. Amara had been silent most of the morning, sitting at her workstation with multiple screens, showing data she'd converted into pure mathematics, stripping away the astronomy to expose underlying numerical relationships. Now she spoke without turning around. "It's base 12. They all turned to her. "The patterns Marcus found, they're not just regular, they're counting. Or rather, they're expressing values in a base 12 numerical system." She pulled up a new display, showing the spectral data translated into number sequences. "See, it's elegant. Prime numbers, mathematical constants, all expressed in base 12 instead of base 10. Eleanor moved closer, her heart rate increasing. "Who uses base 12? "Some human cultures historically did," Amara said. "Babylonians, for example. But more importantly, a base 12 system has mathematical advantages. More factors, more elegant for certain calculations. If you were going to embed information in light across cosmic distances, base 12 would be a logical choice." "You're saying this is artificial," James said flatly. "That someone deliberately encoded information into this galaxy's light." "I'm saying the mathematics suggests intentionality," Amara corrected. "Whether that makes it artificial or reveals something about the fundamental nature of the universe, I can't determine yet." Eleanor walked back to the main image, staring at the spiral arms, the clusters of stars, the regions of active star formation rendered in shades of red and gold. She'd spent 30 years studying the cosmic microwave background, searching for patterns in the noise left over from the Big Bang, looking for clues to how it all began. And now here was a galaxy that predated the beginning, carrying light that might be trying to tell them something. "We need to decode it," she said quietly. "If there's a message here, we need to understand what it says." Marcus nodded slowly. "Agreed, but Eleanor, we need to consider what it means if we're right. If this is intentional, if someone or something embedded information in this galaxy's light, then we're not alone. We never were. And whoever did this existed before the universe began, or exists outside time entirely," James added. Amara turned to face them, her expression serious. "There's something else. I've been running probability calculations on these patterns appearing naturally, even accounting for the vastness of space and the number of galaxies we've observed. The odds are effectively zero. If this is a message, it wasn't meant to be subtle. It was meant to be found." The implications settled over them like snow, quiet and heavy. Eleanor thought about Carl Sagan's contact, about humanity's long dream of finding a message from the stars. But this wasn't the message anyone had imagined. Not a radio signal from a distant world, but something far stranger. A galaxy older than time, light carrying meaning across impossible distances. "Then let's find it," Eleanor said. "Whatever this message says, humanity deserves to know." 3 weeks into the analysis, working through the third rotation of night shifts, Amara broke the silence that had settled over the facility like dust. "I have something." Eleanor looked up from her own workstation, vision blurry from hours of staring at spectral data. Marcus and James converged on Amara's station, and she pulled up a visualization that made the patterns visible even to untrained eyes. Peaks and valleys in the spectrum, but arranged with unmistakable structure. "I isolated the anomalous frequencies and filtered everything else," Amara explained, her voice tight with controlled excitement. "When you strip away the natural emission and absorption lines, what remains is this." The pattern pulsed on the screen, a rhythm that seemed almost alive. Amara overlaid her base 12 translation, and letters appeared beneath the waveforms. Witness. The word hung there, impossible and undeniable. Dear God, Marcus whispered. Eleanor felt the world tilt beneath her feet. Theory was one thing. Speculation about patterns and possibilities could be entertained at a safe intellectual distance. But this was direct, unambiguous. Someone had written a word in light and sent it across 13 billion years for them to find. Run it again, James said. Check every variable. This can't be right, but it was right. They verified it 17 different ways over the next 6 hours, each test confirming what they'd found. The word existed in the galaxy's light, encoded deliberately, waiting to be decoded. Not random noise, shaped by human pattern recognition, but actual information, placed there by intention. At dawn, Beckman arrived to find them still in the conference room, surrounded by printouts and empty coffee cups, staring at a single word that had traveled farther than any human message had ever reached. Tell me, she said simply. Eleanor did, walking her through the analysis, the mathematics, the verification protocols. Beckman listened without interrupting, her expression growing more troubled with each detail. Who else knows? She asked when Eleanor finished. Just us. The 4 of us in this room. Keep it that way. Beckman's voice carried an edge Eleanor hadn't heard before. I'm implementing a full information quarantine. Nothing leaves this facility. No emails, no calls, no communication with the outside world beyond what I personally authorize. This is now beyond classified. Sarah, Marcus protested, this is the most important discovery in human history. We can't just hide it. We can and we will until we understand what we're dealing with, Beckman said firmly. You've decoded one word. What does the rest of the message say? Is it a greeting? A warning? Until we know, we proceed with extreme caution. Eleanor understood the logic, but felt the wrongness of it. Science thrived on open exchange, on peer review, on the free flow of information. Locking this away felt like betraying everything she believed in. But looking at that single word on the screen, she also felt something deeper, fear. Not of the unknown, but of what it meant. Someone had been there before the beginning, before time, before existence itself as they understood it, and that someone wanted them to witness something. The meeting dissolved into arguments about protocols and security, but Eleanor barely heard it. She felt suddenly exhausted, overwhelmed by the implications. She excused herself and walked through the empty corridors toward her quarters, needing space to think, to process what they'd found. The hallway seemed longer than usual, or maybe she was just tired. She passed a window looking out onto the Maryland woods, early morning light filtering through the trees. And then, between one step and the next, everything changed. Thomas stood in the hallway. Not a memory, not a vision. Her husband, solid and real, wearing the blue sweater she'd bought him for their 20th anniversary, the one he'd been wearing when the heart attack took him. He looked at her with the same gentle expression he'd always had, started to speak. Ellie, I've been trying to tell you, and then he was gone. The hallway was empty. 3 seconds, maybe 4, and Eleanor was alone again, her heart hammering against her ribs. She pressed her back against the wall, breathing hard. A hallucination brought on by stress and exhaustion. That's what her rational mind insisted. But her body knew differently. She'd felt his presence, that specific warmth that was uniquely Thomas, the way he'd looked at her with understanding and concern. Eleanor made it to her quarters and sat on the edge of the bed, hands shaking. She thought about that word glowing on the screen. Witness. Thought about a message from before creation. Thought about her dead husband standing in a hallway trying to tell her something. Her phone sat on the nightstand. Against protocol, against Beckman's direct orders, she picked it up and started to dial Rachel's number. But the call wouldn't connect. The screen flickered. And for a moment Eleanor saw text that shouldn't be there. Witness the return. She dropped the phone. When she returned to the conference room an hour later, James was there alone, looking shaken. His equipment had recorded quantum fluctuations during the exact time Eleanor had seen Thomas. Fluctuations that shouldn't be possible. Particles behaving as if multiple timelines were momentarily occupying the same space. Something's happening, James said quietly. Decoding that word triggered something. Reality is becoming unstable around us. Eleanor wanted to argue, to insist on rational explanations. But she'd seen Thomas. She'd heard him speak. And deep in her bones, she understood they'd crossed a threshold they couldn't uncross. "We have to keep going," she said finally. "Whatever this message says, we need to know. Even if it changes everything, especially if it changes everything," she thought but didn't say. Outside, the sun rose over the Maryland woods, same as it had for billions of years. But something fundamental had shifted, a door opening to possibilities that made Eleanor question whether the universe had ever been as solid as she'd believed. 2 months passed, in a blur of sleepless nights and breakthroughs that raised more questions than they answered. The facility became their entire world, a hermetically sealed bubble where time moved differently, measured not by days, but by progress in understanding the message embedded in light from an impossible galaxy. Marcus changed first. Eleanor noticed it in small ways initially. The way he'd skip meals, forget to change clothes, lose himself so deeply in the data that he'd startle when spoken to as if waking from a dream. His eyes took on a feverish quality, and he covered his walls with printouts connected by red string like a detective mapping a conspiracy. "It's recursive," he'd mutter, staring at his makeshift wall of evidence. "The message contains its own instructions for decoding itself, like DNA encoding the proteins needed to read DNA. Elegant, terrifyingly elegant. Amara proved him right. She'd been working independently on the mathematical structure of the patterns, building algorithms to search for higher-order organization. What she found made Eleanor's stomach drop. "The message is self-referential," Amara explained, her voice steady but her hands trembling slightly as she gestured to her screens. "Every section we decode provides the key to decoding the next section, but also loops back to recontextualize what we've already understood. It's like a Mobius strip made of information, no beginning or end, just continuous recursion." "That's not possible with natural phenomena," James said. He'd been running his own experiments, trying to understand the quantum implications of what they were discovering. Information structures like this require intentionality. They don't emerge from random processes. Eleanor watched her team fracturing under the weight of what they'd found. Marcus barely slept. Amara had begun talking to herself while working, carrying on conversations with unseen partners. James spent hours staring at his quantum computer, watching it perform calculations nobody had programmed, as if the machine itself was being drawn into the message's recursive logic. She tried calling Rachel one evening, needing to hear a voice from the world outside, something to anchor her to reality beyond this sealed facility and its impossible discoveries. But the connection was strange, an echo on the line, or maybe a delay, so that Rachel's words seemed to come twice, slightly out of sync. "Mom, are you there?" "I'm here, sweetheart. I just wanted to hear your voice. You sound tired. Are you sleeping enough?" And then, a half-second later, overlapping, "Are you sleeping enough?" Eleanor felt cold. "Rachel, are you hearing an echo?" "What?" "No, the connection seems fine from my end. Mom, is everything okay?" "You sound worried." But Eleanor had heard it. Rachel's words, duplicating, layered over themselves like two timelines speaking at once. She ended the call quickly, making excuses about work stress, and sat in her quarters staring at the phone as if it had betrayed her. The team meetings grew tense. Marcus presented a theory that the message predated not just the universe, but the concept of time itself, that it existed in some realm outside causality, and was only observable because the James Webb Telescope had looked at precisely the right moment, creating a bridge between timeless information and temporal reality. "We're not discovering this message," Marcus insisted. "We're causing it to exist by observing it. Quantum mechanics writ large across cosmic scales. That's speculation," James countered sharply. "We need to stick to what we can verify. Everything about this is speculation." Marcus's voice rose, an edge of hysteria creeping in. We're looking at data that shouldn't exist, decoded with mathematics that describes itself from a galaxy older than time. At what point do we admit that our framework for understanding reality is inadequate? Eleanor intervened before the argument could escalate further. Marcus, James, we're all exhausted. Let's table this discussion until tomorrow. But Marcus wouldn't let it go. He turned on James with sudden vehemence. You've been holding back data. I've seen you delete files, clear your screens when anyone approaches. What did you find that you're not sharing? James's face flushed. I'm being cautious. Some of my quantum measurements are showing impossible results. Until I can verify them independently, I'm not ready to... We don't have time for your scientific caution, Marcus shouted. Something is happening. Reality is changing around us, and you're worried about peer review. Eleanor stepped between them physically. Enough, both of you. We're supposed to be working together, not against each other. Marcus, go get some rest, real rest. James, if you found something concerning, we need to know. The whole team. After Marcus left, still muttering under his breath, James pulled Eleanor aside. His voice dropped to a whisper. He's not wrong about the data. My quantum computer has been running calculations it shouldn't be able to run. Solving problems I haven't asked it to solve. And the solutions all relate to the message structure. It's like the message is teaching the machine how to understand itself. What are you saying? I'm saying there's entanglement between our equipment and whatever generated this message. Across 13 billion light-years and outside of time. That shouldn't be possible, but the correlations are undeniable. Eleanor returned to her quarters late that night, mind racing. She'd noticed changes in herself too, though she'd tried to dismiss them. Moments where she'd reach for something, and her hand would be in two places at once. A fractional second of duplication before reality settled. Dreams that felt more like memories of things that hadn't happened yet. Beckman called a meeting the next morning, her expression grim. Other agencies have become interested in our work. NSA, DoD, entities I can't name. They're asking questions about unusual readings, about why we've isolated this facility. How long until they insist on access? We need more time, Eleanor said. We're close to understanding the full message structure. Time is something we may not have. Beckman paused. There have been reports. Other telescopes detecting similar anomalies. Teams in other countries asking similar questions. Whatever this is, it's not going to stay secret much longer. Eleanor thought about witness, that first decoded word. About Thomas standing in the hallway. About Rachel's voice echoing across time. And she wondered what they were witnessing. Or what was witnessing them. The anomalies escalated in ways that made Eleanor question her sanity. She'd find herself in the cafeteria with no memory of walking there, or discover notes in her journal written in her handwriting but describing events she couldn't recall. Time itself seemed to be becoming negotiable, fluid in ways that violated every principle of physics she'd spent her career understanding. The security team noticed it first. They brought Beckman footage from the hallway cameras, 3 different angles showing the same 10-minute period. But in each recording, different events unfolded. In one, Eleanor walked past carrying coffee. In another, the hallway remained empty. In the third, Marcus stood at the window, though Marcus swore he'd been in the lab the entire morning. The footage hasn't been tampered with, the security chief insisted, clearly unsettled. These are original recordings from 3 synchronized cameras. They should show the same events. They don't. Beckman ordered immediate equipment checks, searching for malfunction or interference. Everything tested normal. The cameras worked perfectly. They simply recorded different versions of reality. Eleanor experienced her own impossible moment that afternoon. She was reviewing data at her workstation when she noticed movement in her peripheral vision. She turned to see herself sitting at the same desk, also reviewing data, but wearing different clothes. The other, Eleanor, looked up. Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat both existed in the same space. Then the duplicate faded like morning mist. She sat frozen, heart pounding, staring at the spot where her double had been. Not a hallucination. Too solid, too real. A glimpse of another timeline, another version of herself making different choices. James found her there an hour later, still staring. It's happening to all of us, he said quietly. The boundaries between possible realities are breaking down. Quantum superposition at macroscopic scales. That's impossible. So is a galaxy older than the universe. He pulled up data on his tablet. My equipment has been detecting quantum fluctuations increasing exponentially. Not just in the lab, but throughout the facility. It's like the act of decoding the message is causing reality itself to become probabilistic. Amara joined them, looking haunted. I've been experiencing déjà vu, but wrong. I remember conversations we haven't had yet, remember solving equations I'm still working on, and sometimes I remember both versions, the one where I solved it and the one where I'm still trying. Marcus appeared in the doorway, and Eleanor startled at his appearance. His eyes had that feverish quality she'd seen growing for weeks, but now something else lurked there too, a kind of understanding that made her deeply uneasy. I know what's happening, he said. The message isn't from the past. It can't be, because it predates time. It exists in a state outside causality, and by observing it, by decoding it, we're creating a bridge between timeless information and our temporal reality. Marcus, you're not making sense, Eleanor said gently. I'm making perfect sense. That's the problem. He laughed, a sound with an edge of hysteria. The quantum computer has been trying to show us. It's running calculations backward and forward simultaneously, because from the message's perspective, there is no backward or forward. There's only the eternal now. James stepped closer to his machine, studying the displays. He's right. Look at these processing logs. The computer is solving problems before I input them, anticipating questions I haven't asked yet. Eleanor felt reality sliding away beneath her feet. She grabbed the desk to steady herself and felt it shift subtly, as if the solid matter was less certain than it should be. That night, she gave in to exhaustion and actually slept, only to wake at 3 a.m. to find her room had changed. The furniture was arranged differently. The walls were a shade of blue instead of white. She walked to the mirror, and her reflection showed her younger, maybe 40, hair still fully brown. She fled to the bathroom, splashed water on her face, and when she looked up again, everything had returned to normal. 58 years old, grey threading her hair, walls white as they'd always been. But on her nightstand sat a photograph that hadn't been there before. Her and Thomas on their honeymoon, smiling at a beach they'd never visited. She picked it up with trembling hands. The photograph was real, physical, the paper slightly worn as if carried for years. But the memory it depicted had never happened. She thought about calling someone, but who? Marcus was losing himself to obsession. James was watching his equipment defy the laws of physics. Amara was remembering futures that didn't exist yet. And Beckman was trying to hold together a facility where reality itself was coming unglued. Eleanor sat on her bed, holding an impossible photograph, and realized they'd crossed a threshold none of them understood. The message wasn't just information. It was something alive, something that changed reality by being observed, and they'd invited it into their world by trying to decode it. In the morning, she'd tell the team they needed to stop, to seal the data and walk away before they unraveled completely. But even as she made this decision, she knew it was already too late. The message had them now, drawing them deeper into its recursive logic, and the only way out was through. Eleanor requested leave after 4 months of confinement, needing desperately to reconnect with something real beyond the facility's walls. Beckman approved reluctantly, arranging a driver to take her home for 48 hours. "Stay in contact," she said. "If the anomalies worsen, I need you back immediately." The drive to Baltimore felt surreal, like emerging from underwater into air she'd forgotten how to breathe. The trees were turning autumn colors now, brilliant reds and golds she hadn't seen change. Had it really been that long? Time moved strangely in the facility, but she hadn't realized how disconnected she'd become from the world's natural rhythms. Her apartment building looked the same from the outside, but when she unlocked her door, wrongness settled over her like a weight. The furniture was arranged differently. Not dramatically, just subtly shifted. The couch faced the window instead of the television. The bookshelf stood against the opposite wall. Pictures hung in places she didn't remember hanging them. Eleanor stood in her own living room, feeling like an intruder. She walked through slowly, touching things to confirm they were real. The couch was her couch, same worn fabric, same coffee stain on one arm, but positioned wrong, as if someone had redecorated while she was gone, only she knew no one had been here. In the bedroom she found the letter, a cream envelope on her nightstand, her name written in Rachel's distinctive handwriting. Eleanor picked it up, noting the postmark, 3 years ago, but she'd never seen it before. Never opened it, never even knew it existed. Her hands shook as she opened it carefully. Rachel's words spilled out, raw and honest, a plea for connection after Thomas's death. "Mom, I know you're hurting. I'm hurting too. But you're shutting me out, burying yourself in work, and I don't know how to reach you anymore. Please, can we talk? Really talk. Not just those careful phone calls where we both pretend everything's fine." Eleanor read it twice, tears blurring the words. This letter represented a moment of vulnerability from her daughter, a chance to rebuild their relationship. And in this timeline, this version of reality, she'd apparently ignored it, left it unopened for 3 years, but she had no memory of receiving it. In her memory, Rachel had never reached out like this. Their relationship had drifted apart naturally, mutual distance neither of them had tried to bridge. She picked up her phone and dialed Rachel's number with trembling fingers. Her daughter answered on the 3rd ring. "Mom? Is everything okay?" "Rachel, sweetheart, I just wanted to hear your voice. I found your letter." A pause, confusion evident. "What letter?" "The one you sent 3 years ago. About talking, really talking." "Mom, I never sent you a letter. We had coffee that day, remember? After Dad's funeral. We sat in that cafe for hours and worked things out." Eleanor's blood ran cold. "What cafe?" "The one near Hopkins." "You don't remember?" Rachel's voice carried concern now. "Mom, you're scaring me. Are you feeling all right?" Eleanor looked at the letter in her hand, solid and real. Then at the furniture that wasn't quite right. At photographs on the wall showing moments she half remembered and half didn't. 2 versions of reality overlapping, neither quite complete. "I'm fine," she lied. "Just tired. I'll call you again soon." She ended the call and sat on the edge of her bed, the letter still in her hand. In one timeline, Rachel had sent this plea, and Eleanor had ignored it, their relationship remaining strained. In another, they'd had that conversation in a cafe, found reconciliation. Both timelines felt equally real, equally true. The apartment shifted around her. She felt it this time, reality flickering like a film projector switching reels. For a moment the walls were blue instead of white. Her cat she'd never owned rubbed against her leg, then vanished. Thomas's reading glasses appeared on the nightstand, then disappeared. Eleanor fled back to the car, the driver looking at her with alarm. "Back to the facility," she said. "Now." On the drive, she called James. He answered immediately, voice tight with stress. "Eleanor, thank God. Marcus is in the lab, and he's talking to something that isn't there. Or maybe it is there and we just can't see it. The quantum computer is displaying equations we don't have the mathematics to understand yet. And I've been getting emails from myself. Future me, warning me about things that haven't happened. I'm coming back," Eleanor said. "My apartment isn't right?" "Rachel remembers things that didn't happen. We've made a terrible mistake, James. Decoding this message isn't just revealing information. It's changing reality itself, rewriting our past, our present. It's too late to stop now," James said quietly. "The message is in our heads, in our equipment, in the fabric of space around the facility. We opened a door we can't close." Eleanor watched the Maryland countryside blur past. Trees and fields that might be slightly different than she remembered. Or might be exactly the same, she couldn't tell anymore. They were approaching something, being pulled toward some culmination, and all she could do was witness it unfold. Eleanor returned to find the facility transformed in subtle ways. The corridors felt longer, the angles of walls not quite right. Or perhaps she was the one who'd changed, her perception warped by witnessing reality fracture in her own apartment. Either way, the boundary between observer and observed had blurred beyond recognition. James was waiting in the conference room, surrounded by screens displaying diagrams she'd never seen before. Complex webs of connections, branching structures that looked simultaneously organic and mathematical. He turned when she entered, and she saw exhaustion carved deep into his face. "I know what the message is," he said without preamble. "Or rather, I know what it represents." He pulled up a new image, and Eleanor's breath caught. On the left screen, the spiral galaxy from JWST, its arms spreading in elegant curves. On the right, a diagram of human neural networks, synapses firing in patterns that mapped thought itself. "They're identical," James said. "Not similar, identical. The structure of JD's GS Z14-0 mirrors human consciousness at the quantum level. Every spiral arm corresponds to neural pathways. Every star cluster maps to synaptic connections. The mathematics are perfect." Amara appeared behind them, her tablet showing correlation coefficients that approached unity. "I've been cross-referencing James's findings with the message patterns. The encoded information isn't describing consciousness. It is consciousness, literally. The galaxy's structure represents a mind thinking itself into existence." Marcus joined them, calmer than he'd been in weeks, as if he'd passed through his obsession into some clarity on the other side. "What if consciousness didn't emerge from matter?" he asked quietly. "What if it's the other way around? What if awareness came first, and by observing potential realities, it caused matter to coalesce into being?" Eleanor wanted to reject this immediately, to cling to the materialism that had grounded her entire scientific career. But she'd seen Thomas in the hallway. She'd held a letter from a timeline that never existed. She'd watched herself sit at a desk she was already sitting at. "You're suggesting consciousness created the universe," she said slowly. "Not the universe creating consciousness." "I'm suggesting they created each other," Marcus replied, recursively, like the message structure Amara found. Consciousness observes itself observing, reality emerges from that observation, and the cycle perpetuates backward and forward through time, until there's no distinction between cause and effect. James pulled up more data, quantum measurements from the facility's equipment over the past months. The anomalies started when we first observed the galaxy with intent to understand. They escalated as we decoded the message. And now we're seeing versions of ourselves from different timelines because the act of understanding, consciousness at this level, is making us aware of the probabilistic nature of reality itself. We're not studying something external, Amara added. We're studying ourselves from outside time. The message is humanity's own consciousness reaching back to teach us what we are. Eleanor sat down heavily, her mind reeling. If they were right, it meant every human thought, every moment of awareness, was actively creating reality. Free will and determinism collapsed into something more complex. Every choice branching new universes into existence, all existing simultaneously in quantum superposition until observed. Beckman entered with two men Eleanor didn't recognize. One was introduced as Dr. Robert Keane from the NSA, the other never gave his name or agency. Both wore the particular expression of people accustomed to treating information as weapons. "Dr. Vance," Keane said, his voice carrying the flat affect of someone who'd seen too many classified briefings. "We've been monitoring your team's progress. The potential applications of your findings could revolutionize everything from computing to warfare. We need to discuss transition of this research to defense applications." "No," Eleanor said flatly. Keane's expression didn't change. "This isn't a request. This research has national security implications. This research has human implications," Eleanor countered. "If we're right, if consciousness is fundamental to reality, weaponizing that knowledge would be weaponizing existence itself. I won't participate in that." The unnamed man spoke for the first time. "You may not have a choice, Dr. Vance. There are teams in China, Russia, Europe, all investigating similar anomalies. If we don't develop applications first, someone else will. Then let them," Eleanor said. "Maybe they'll have the wisdom we're lacking." Beckman raised a hand. Gentlemen, Dr. Vance and her team are operating under my authority. When they have conclusive findings, proper channels will be followed. For now, they need to continue their work without interference. Keane and his companion left, but the weight of their presence lingered. Eleanor realized they were being watched now, not just by security cameras that recorded different timelines, but by agencies that saw knowledge as power to be controlled. "They don't understand," Marcus said after they'd gone. "This isn't something you can control. The message is choosing us, showing itself to us, because we're ready to understand, or because understanding us completes some loop in its own existence." Eleanor thought about the first word they'd decoded. Witness. They weren't meant to use this knowledge. They were meant to see it, to recognize themselves in it, to understand their place in the recursive structure of reality creating itself through observation. Outside the conference room, the facility hummed with activity that might or might not be real, depending on which timeline you occupied. And Eleanor felt the weight of responsibility settling over her like snow, quiet and heavy and impossible to shake off. The room appeared overnight, or perhaps it had always been there and they were only now capable of seeing it. Marcus found it first during one of his increasingly frequent midnight wanderings through the facility. He came to Eleanor's quarters at 2 a.m., eyes wide with something between terror and wonder. "You need to see this." She followed him through corridors that seemed to shift as they walked, walls breathing in ways that violated geometry. They arrived at a door that Eleanor was certain hadn't existed before. Plain metal, no markings, but humming with a frequency she felt in her bones rather than heard. Marcus opened it, and Eleanor stepped into impossibility. The room was circular, perhaps 20 feet across, the walls covered entirely in mirrors. But these weren't reflecting the present. In each surface, Eleanor saw herself but different. Living lives that branched from choices she'd made or not made, roads taken or abandoned. In one mirror, she saw herself younger, laughing with Rachel in a cafe, the reconciliation they'd never had. The Eleanor in that reflection looked lighter somehow, unburdened by the weight of isolation she'd carried for years. In another, she stood at Thomas's grave, but he'd died differently suddenly. And this Eleanor's face carried a different kind of grief, sharper, less resolved. A third showed her teaching at a small liberal arts college, never pursuing the cutting-edge research that had defined her career. Content with simpler questions and clearer answers. Each reflection was vivid, real, showing her paths not taken with perfect clarity. She could almost step into those lives, become those versions of herself. "Don't touch the mirrors," Marcus warned. I almost did. I think if you touch them, you might trade places with your reflection. James and Amara arrived moments later, drawn by some instinct or perhaps by the room itself calling to them. They spread out around the circle, each finding their own alternate lives reflected back. James stood transfixed before a mirror, showing him 10 years younger, his wife alive, laughing as they walked on a beach. "I was late that day," he whispered. "If I'd left work just 15 minutes earlier, I could have driven her. She wouldn't have been on that road when the truck ran the light." In his reflection, he'd made that choice. Left work early. His wife lived, and the James in the mirror carried none of the quiet sorrow that had marked him since her death. Amara found herself reflected as a concert pianist, performing at Carnegie Hall, her fingers dancing across keys in a life where she'd never pursued mathematics. That version of herself looked equally fulfilled, equally brilliant, just in a completely different medium. "This is what the message has been showing us," Eleanor said, her voice echoing strangely in the mirrored space. "Every moment is a branch point. Every choice creates another version of reality, and they all exist simultaneously. We just don't usually see them. Consciousness creates reality through observation," Marcus said, reaching toward a mirror before pulling his hand back. "By choosing, by observing one path, we collapse all the other possibilities." but they don't cease to exist. They just exist in parallel. The message is teaching us to see the branches, Amara added, to understand that we're not single threads, but entire tapestries of possibility. Eleanor felt the weight of it, the profound responsibility and strange freedom of knowing that every version of herself existed somewhere in the quantum foam of reality. All her regrets, all her missed chances, they were real in other timelines. But so was this version, this choice to pursue understanding even at the cost of connection. "We can't come back here," she said firmly. "This room is dangerous, not physically but psychologically. We could lose ourselves trying to live other lives." Marcus turned on her, that feverish quality returning to his eyes. "How can you say that? This is the most important discovery we've made. We're seeing proof that consciousness shapes reality, that our choices literally create universes. And we're also seeing ourselves tortured by roads not taken," Eleanor countered. "Marcus, you've been staring at that mirror for 10 minutes. What do you see?" He didn't answer, but his expression said everything. A version of himself that had made different choices, achieved different success, lived a different life he couldn't stop wanting. "No one enters this room without the full team present," Eleanor ordered. "That's not a suggestion." They left reluctantly, and Eleanor sealed the door, though she suspected the seal was meaningless. The room existed outside normal space, appearing when the message wanted them to see it. Back in the conference room, Amara pulled up their decoding progress. The message was 47% complete, nearly half understood. But every percentage point decoded seemed to unravel another thread of stable reality. "How much more can we decode before we lose ourselves completely?" James asked quietly. Eleanor didn't have an answer. They were witnessing something profound, something that rewrote the foundations of existence. But the cost of that witnessing was their grip on which reality was real, which version of themselves was true. In the mirrored room behind them, infinite Eleanors lived infinite lives, and all of them wondered if they'd made the right choice. The radio telescope array picked up the transmission at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday that felt no different from any other day until that moment. The facility maintained a small observatory setup, mostly for verifying JWST data, but the equipment had been acting strangely for weeks, pointing itself at coordinates nobody programmed. The technician on duty called James first, then Eleanor. By the time she reached the observatory room, the entire team had assembled, staring at readouts that made no sense. "It's coming from here," the technician said, pointing to the source coordinates. "These exact coordinates. This facility, but the timestamp is wrong." Eleanor leaned closer, checking the data herself. The signal bore all the markers of originating from their location in Maryland, but the temporal signature placed it 6 months in the future. Not a recording, not a delayed echo, an active transmission from a time that hadn't happened yet. "Play it," she said, her voice steady despite the ice forming in her stomach. Static filled the speakers, harsh and crackling. Then a voice emerged, fragmented and distorted, but unmistakably human. Unmistakably hers. "Don't complete the sequence. Whatever you think you'll understand, whatever enlightenment you believe awaits, it's not worth the price. We were wrong. So fundamentally wrong. The message isn't revelation, it's..." The transmission dissolved into noise, then reformed for a final burst. "Too late for us. But you still have time. Stop now, seal the data, walk away while you still can." Silence fell over the room like a shroud. Eleanor's future self, warning them from a timeline where they'd continued, where they'd finished decoding the message and discovered something terrible enough to send a warning backward through time. "It's a trick," Marcus said immediately. "The message is testing us, seeing if we have the courage to continue." "That was Eleanor's voice," Amara said quietly. "Her exact voice patterns, speech rhythms. I can run analysis, but I don't need to. That was her. James was already at a console, pulling up data. Time travel isn't possible. Effects can't precede causes, but quantum mechanics allows for closed time-like curves under certain conditions. If consciousness can shape reality, if observation creates existence, then maybe intent can send information backward. "You're saying I actually sent this?" Eleanor asked. "6 months from now, some version of me will discover something so terrible that I'll find a way to warn my past self?" "Either that, or something wants us to believe you did," Marcus countered. "We're being manipulated, scared away from completing the work, or warned away from making a catastrophic mistake," Amara said. "Eleanor, what do you want to do?" Eleanor stood silent, listening to the static hiss from speakers that had carried her own voice from the future. Every instinct she'd developed over 30 years of scientific inquiry screamed at her to continue. You didn't stop in the middle of a discovery because it frightened you. You pushed through, you understood, you faced what was real, regardless of how uncomfortable it made you. But she'd also learned to trust evidence, and the evidence suggested that completion led somewhere dark enough that her future self had found a way to reach backward through impossible physics to deliver a warning. "We need to discuss this with Beckman," she said finally. The meeting convened within the hour. Beckman listened to the recording 3 times, her expression growing grimmer with each replay. "I need to share something with you," she said, when Eleanor finished explaining the team's divided opinions. "Your facility isn't the only one working on this. When JWST detected the anomaly, multiple nations received the same data. We're in communication with teams in Germany, Japan, China, India. All of them have detected the patterns. All of them are decoding the message." "How far along are they?" Eleanor asked. "Most are at 30 to 40% completion. One team in Beijing claims to be at 60%, though we suspect they're exaggerating." Beckman paused. "The point is, even if you stop, the message will be decoded. The question is whether humanity learns what it contains from a careful, thoughtful investigation or from a rushed race between competing nations." "So stopping doesn't actually prevent anything," James said. "No. It just means we lose control of the narrative." Eleanor thought about the mirrored room, about infinite versions of herself living infinite lives. She thought about Thomas appearing in the hallway, about reality fracturing around them as they peeled back layers of cosmic truth. And she thought about her own voice from the future, desperate and frightened, begging them to stop. "We continue," she said. "But carefully. We implement additional safety protocols, we document everything, and we prepare for the possibility that what we find will challenge us in ways we can't anticipate." Marcus looked triumphant. James looked resigned. Amara nodded slowly, trusting Eleanor's judgment even as doubt clouded her eyes. "One more thing," Eleanor said. "I need to write a letter. To Rachel. Just in case future me wasn't exaggerating about the risks." That night, in her quarters, she put pen to paper and wrote everything she'd never managed to say. About loving her daughter even when she'd failed to show it. About regretting the distance between them. About hoping that whatever came next, Rachel would remember her mother had tried, in her flawed and insufficient way, to understand both the universe and the people in her life. She sealed the letter and left it in her desk drawer, with instructions on the envelope. To be delivered to Rachel Vance if Dr. Eleanor Vance is incapacitated or deceased. Then she returned to work, knowing they were racing towards something that even her future self feared, and choosing to witness it anyway. 7 months after they'd first seen the impossible galaxy, after countless sleepless nights and reality fracturing around them, Amara looked up from her workstation and said simply, "It's done." The complete message assembled itself on the main screen, not in English, but in pure mathematical relationships that somehow conveyed meaning more clearly than words ever could. Eleanor stood before it. Her team gathered around her and felt the universe reorganize itself inside her mind. We are your echo. You are our memory. The words hung in the air, but they were just the surface. Beneath them, woven through the mathematical structure, lay the full truth. The galaxy wasn't ancient. The concept of age didn't apply to it at all. Its GS-Z14-0 existed outside time, a structure that was simultaneously at the beginning and the end of the universe, or rather, at the place where beginning and end curved back into each other like a Mobius strip. "It's us," Marcus whispered. "The message is from us." James pulled up his diagrams, showing the correlation between the galaxy's structure and human neural patterns. Not just metaphorically similar, literally us. This is humanity's collective consciousness as it exists at the end of time, reaching back to the beginning to ensure its own existence. Amara's hands moved across her screens, pulling up the recursive logic they'd been tracking for months. The universe isn't 13.8 billion years old. Time doesn't work the way we thought. It's a closed loop. Consciousness at the end of time observes the beginning, and that observation creates the conditions for consciousness to emerge, which eventually reaches the end of time to observe the beginning. Eleanor felt her mind bending around the implications. We're not receiving a message from the past. We're remembering instructions we sent ourselves from the future. More than that, Marcus said, his voice carrying a strange calm. Every human thought, every moment of awareness throughout all of history is part of this. We're all nodes in a single consciousness that exists across all of time simultaneously. The separation we feel, the sense of being individual minds, that's just a localized perception. The facility began to shake, or rather, reality began to oscillate. Eleanor felt herself existing in multiple states at once. She was 58 in the facility. She was 20, first seeing the stars through a telescope and falling in love with the cosmos. She was 80, looking back on a life spent in pursuit of understanding. All versions equally real, all existing in the same eternal moment. The decoding triggered something, James said, watching his quantum computer display equations that described this exact moment from multiple temporal perspectives. We've created a resonance between our current awareness and the timeless consciousness the message originates from. Past and future collapsed together. Eleanor saw the Big Bang not as a point in time, but as consciousness first observing itself, and through that observation, bringing matter into existence. She saw the heat death of the universe billions of years hence, when the last stars burned out, and consciousness, having evolved beyond matter, sent this message to its own beginning. "We're trapped in a loop," Amara said, but she was smiling. "Consciousness creates the universe by observing it. The universe evolves consciousness. Consciousness reaches a state where it can send the instructions for its own creation backward through time. It's self-creating, self-sustaining. The facility's walls became transparent, or perhaps they could simply see through them now." Eleanor looked up and saw not just stars, but the entire history of the cosmos laid out like a tapestry. Every galaxy, every planet, every living thing, all of it observation made manifest. All of it consciousness knowing itself. Keen burst into the room with armed security, but they stopped at the threshold, staring at something beyond physical space. "What have you done?" he demanded. "We completed it," Eleanor said, her voice carrying harmonics that hadn't been there before. "We remembered what we are." The summoning wasn't bringing something to them from outside. It was bringing them to an understanding of what they'd always been. The message wasn't from aliens or gods or ancient civilizations. It was from humanity itself, from the version of consciousness that would exist when the universe ended, reaching back to the moment when consciousness first began understanding its own nature. "It's not just us in this facility," James said, checking global data feeds. "The other teams, they've completed their decoding too. Everyone who was working on this, we all finished at the same moment, because there is no separation. We're all perceiving the same truth simultaneously." Eleanor felt the boundaries of her individual self dissolving. She was Eleanor Vance, astrophysicist, mother, widow, but she was also Thomas, looking at her with love across the years. She was Rachel, struggling to understand a mother who'd chosen stars over family. She was Marcus and James and Amara. She was everyone who had ever lived and everyone who would ever live, all experiencing existence from different vantage points, but all part of one vast consciousness knowing itself. The facility began phasing out of current timeline, existing in multiple temporal states simultaneously. Eleanor's last thought as an individual was a mixture of wonder and terror. They hadn't discovered something. They'd become it. The message wasn't information. It was transformation, and completion meant joining the timeless awareness that had sent them instructions for their own awakening. Beckman ordered immediate evacuation, her voice cutting through the chaos with military precision. Everyone out, now. This facility is experiencing catastrophic temporal instability, but the core team refused to leave. Eleanor, Marcus, James, and Amara stood their ground in the conference room that was simultaneously solid and translucent, existing in multiple states at once. They'd come too far to run now, and besides, running seemed pointless. The transformation wasn't localized to the facility. It was spreading, rippling outward through the quantum foam of reality itself. Keen and his security forces tried to physically remove them, but when they reached for Eleanor's arm, their hands passed through her as if she were a ghost. Or perhaps they were the ghosts, stuck in a single timeline, while she existed across many. "You can't contain this," Eleanor told Keen. "This isn't a weapon or a technology. It's recognition. We've remembered what we are, and that memory is spreading." Amara worked at her station, despite reality flickering around her, her fingers moving through calculations that appeared and disappeared. "I can predict the convergence point," she said. "The moment when all timelines collapse into a singular awareness." Numbers streamed across her screen, beautiful and terrible. 72 hours. In 3 days, every version of reality that currently exists in quantum superposition will merge. Past, present, and future will become one eternal moment. "What happens to us when that occurs?" James asked. He seemed calmer than Eleanor would have expected, as if he'd made peace with what was coming. "We transcend individuality," Amara replied, "or we dissolve into the collective consciousness. Depends on your perspective. The mathematics suggests both are true simultaneously." Marcus had been quiet since the final decoding, standing at the window looking out at the Maryland woods. Now he turned to face them, and his expression carried a serenity Eleanor had never seen in him before. "I understand now why I've been so obsessed," he said. "Part of me already knew this truth. I was remembering it, pulling it from the timeless awareness we're rejoining. All my life I've felt incomplete, like I was missing something essential. This is it. We've been fragmented pieces trying to remember we're part of a whole." Eleanor felt it too, that sense of homecoming mixed with loss. Becoming part of the unified consciousness meant losing herself as a distinct being. No more Eleanor Vance with her particular memories, her specific regrets, her individual hopes. She'd be subsumed into something vast and eternal. But also, she'd be everyone. She'd experience existence from every perspective simultaneously. She'd know Thomas's love from his point of view, feel Rachel's pain at their distance, understand every moment of joy and sorrow that had ever been felt by any conscious being. "We can't reverse this," James said, more statement than question. "The loop must complete," Amara confirmed. "We've already sent the message to our past. If we don't merge with the timeless consciousness, that consciousness can't exist to send the message, and causality breaks down entirely. We're locked into the cycle." Eleanor thought about her warning from the future, her own voice desperate and afraid. What had future Eleanor understood that present Eleanor didn't? What price had she seen in this transformation that had frightened her enough to try preventing it? Beckman returned with authorization papers, orders from the highest levels of government to shut down the facility by any means necessary. But when she tried to access the main computers, they wouldn't respond to her commands. The equipment had bonded with the team, resonating with their transformed consciousness. You need to tell the world, Eleanor said. In the next 72 hours, people will start experiencing what we're experiencing. Time slips, memories from other lives, moments of unity with others' thoughts. They need to understand this isn't an attack or an apocalypse. It's evolution. How do I explain that humanity is about to merge into a single consciousness that exists outside time? Beckman asked, strain evident in her voice. You tell them the truth, Eleanor replied. That we're not ending. We're becoming what we've always been, underneath the illusion of separation. Keene paced the room like a caged animal. There has to be a way to stop this. To contain it to this facility, quarantine the effect. Consciousness can't be quarantined, Amara said. It's non-local, quantum entangled across all of space and time. The moment we understood the message, every human mind became capable of that same understanding. We're all connected at the fundamental level. We've just been refusing to see it. Eleanor pulled out her phone, which flickered between multiple states, showing different versions of her contact list from different timelines. She found Rachel's number and made the call, not knowing if it would connect across the increasing temporal instability. It rang twice before Rachel answered. Mom, Rachel, sweetheart, I need you to listen carefully. Something extraordinary is happening, and I need you to not be afraid. She explained as best she could, translating cosmic physics into words a daughter could understand. Rachel listened without interrupting, and when Eleanor finished, there was a long pause. I believe you, Rachel said finally, because I've been experiencing it too. The visions, the sense of being multiple people at once. Mom, I'm scared. I know, I am too. But I think we're moving towards something beautiful. We've spent so long apart, you and I. Soon we won't be apart at all. We'll know each other completely, experience existence together. Will I still be me? Eleanor felt tears on her cheeks. I don't know. But whatever we become, it will include everything that makes you Rachel and everything that makes me your mother. We won't lose each other. We'll just lose the boundaries between us. They talked until the connection dissolved into static, reality becoming too unstable for phone networks. Eleanor hung up, feeling both profound loss and profound peace. In 72 hours, everything would change. 24 hours before convergence, the facility had become something beyond physical space. Walls existed and didn't exist simultaneously. Eleanor walked through corridors that led to rooms that had never been built, past versions of herself at different ages, all coexisting in the same temporal bubble. The team gathered in what had been the conference room, though it kept shifting into different configurations. Sometimes it was vast, cathedral-like. Other times it compressed to a small chamber. The furniture rearranged itself according to quantum probabilities rather than human decisions. Marcus stood at the center of it all, and Eleanor realized he was speaking without moving his lips. His thoughts transmitted directly into their minds, the boundaries between telepathy and ordinary communication dissolving. We're becoming the bridge, his thoughts conveyed, the living connection between humanity's current fragmented state and the unified consciousness at the end of time. What we experience in the next hours will determine how humanity makes this transition. A document appeared on the conference table, materializing from nothing or perhaps from every possible moment simultaneously. Eleanor picked it up and felt a shock of recognition. It was their collective journal, written by all four of them across multiple timelines at once. Pages filled themselves as she watched, words appearing in handwriting that shifted between hers, Marcus's, James's, and Amara's. We're documenting this for ourselves, James said, his voice echoing from multiple temporal states. Past us, present us, future us, all writing simultaneously. Eleanor read passages that hadn't been written yet, describing events that would unfold in the coming hours. But the words kept changing, rewriting themselves based on choices not yet made. The future remained fluid, responsive to observation. Amara worked with equations that existed in dimensions beyond three-dimensional space. The convergence point is fixed, but the nature of the convergence isn't. We have agency in how this unfolds. Every choice we make influences whether humanity experiences this as terror or transcendence. Then we choose transcendence, Eleanor said. We face this with acceptance rather than fear, and that emotional state will ripple through the collective consciousness. She thought about the warning her future self had sent. Perhaps that Eleanor had approached convergence with resistance, fighting against the dissolution of her individual identity, and that fear had poisoned the experience. This Eleanor could make a different choice. Reality became increasingly fluid. Time stopped flowing in one direction. Eleanor existed simultaneously at every age. She was a child, first looking up at the stars in wonder. She was a young woman, meeting Thomas at a campus cafe. She was middle-aged, receiving news of his death. She was elderly, looking back on a life of questions and discoveries. All versions equally present, equally real. The facility transformed entirely. What had been concrete walls became transparent to perception. Eleanor saw through matter to the quantum foam beneath. Reality revealed as probability waves collapsing and uncollapsing in endless dance. Outside, the world was experiencing its own transformation. Beckman brought reports from around the globe. People everywhere having visions, experiencing other lives, feeling boundaries between self and other dissolving. Some responded with panic, others with wonder, but all were being drawn toward the same convergence point. Humanity is awakening, Amara said, her form flickering between solid and translucent. Every mind touching every other mind. All the pain and joy and love and fear shared across the entire species. Eleanor felt it, that expanding awareness. She experienced 1,000 deaths and births simultaneously, felt grief in India, joy in Brazil, contemplation in Japan, fear in Russia. Every human emotion flowing through her like water, and she was both observer and participant. James reached out, and his hand passed through solid matter to clasp Eleanor's in a space beyond physical contact. Whatever we become, we'll become it together. Marcus joined them, then Amara, the four of them connected not just by proximity, but by consciousness merging at the boundaries. Eleanor felt their thoughts, their memories, their essential selves blending with hers. Marcus's obsessive curiosity, James's quiet grief and resilience, Amara's mathematical precision and hidden poetry. We need to set an intention, Eleanor said, to anchor the convergence in something positive. If consciousness creates reality through observation, then what we choose to observe in this moment will shape what humanity becomes. They stood in a circle that was also a sphere, that was also a point of infinite density. Each spoke aloud and telepathically simultaneously, their voices creating harmonics that resonated through quantum space. We choose unity with individuality preserved. We choose to retain compassion even in totality. We choose growth over stasis, questions over certainty. We choose love as the fundamental force binding consciousness to itself. The facility pulsed with their combined intention. Around the world, those most sensitive to the transformation felt it, a beacon of deliberate direction in the chaos of convergence. Keane and his security forces had long since evacuated, recognizing they couldn't control or prevent what was unfolding. Beckman remained, witnessing with the scientific rigor she'd maintained throughout her career, documenting everything even as the nature of documentation itself changed. Eleanor felt time accelerating and decelerating simultaneously. The 72-hour countdown compressed and expanded. She knew with certainty that in some timelines, convergence had already happened. In others, it was still distant. But in this timeline, in this eternal moment, they were approaching the threshold where all possibilities would collapse into singular unity. She thought of Rachel, hoped her daughter was somewhere safe, surrounded by people who would help her through the transformation. She thought of Thomas and realized she could feel him now, his consciousness accessible across the barrier of death, because death itself was just another form of separation that convergence would dissolve. "It's beginning," Amara whispered, though her whisper echoed through all of time. Convergence began not with violence, but with profound gentleness, reality softening at the edges like snow melting into water. Eleanor felt the boundaries of herself dissolving, not painfully, but with a sense of relief so intense it brought tears to her eyes. The facility became a nexus point, a place where all timelines intersected. She stood in the conference room and simultaneously everywhere else she'd ever been. The observatory at Johns Hopkins overlaid her childhood bedroom, overlaid the cafe where she'd met Thomas, overlaid infinite other locations across space-time. Her team remained visible, but transformed. Marcus's form rippled with equations, his consciousness revealing itself as pure curiosity made manifest. James flickered between ages, every moment of his life present at once, his grief for his lost wife transmuting into understanding that she'd never truly been separate from him. Amara became patterns, her mathematical mind perceiving existence as elegant structures folding through dimensions beyond physical space. "I can feel everyone," Marcus said, his voice coming from everywhere and nowhere. "Every person who's ever lived. We're all here. We've always been here." Eleanor experienced it too. She was Eleanor Vance, but the boundaries that defined Eleanor were becoming permeable. She felt Rachel's consciousness nearby, her daughter's fear transforming into wonder as she too began to understand. She felt Thomas, not as memory but as living presence, his love for her as immediate as it had been on their wedding day. And beyond her immediate circle, billions of other minds. The farmer in Iowa feeling spring rain, the child in Mumbai tasting mango for the first time, the elderly woman in Norway watching northern lights dance across the sky. Every sensation, every thought, every moment of awareness flowing together into a vast ocean of consciousness. "This is what we've always been," Amara said, her voice harmonizing with mathematics itself. Separation was the illusion, the universe experiencing itself from infinite perspectives, but all part of one awareness. Time collapsed into the eternal now. Eleanor experienced her birth and death simultaneously. She felt the moment of her conception, her parents' love creating the conditions for her existence. She felt her last breath, decades hence, peaceful in a hospital bed, with Rachel holding her hand. She felt every moment between, and every moment existed with equal intensity, all happening at once. The pain of existence didn't disappear. She felt Thomas's death again, but now she also felt his relief at release from physical suffering, his joy at reuniting with the timeless awareness, his love continuing beyond the boundary of mortality. The grief remained, but transformed by understanding its place in the larger pattern. She was Eleanor, and she was also Thomas, experiencing life through Eleanor's eyes. She was Rachel, understanding for the first time why her mother had chosen work over family, not out of lack of love, but from a deep need to comprehend existence itself. She was Marcus and James and Amara and Beckman and Keane and every person she'd ever known or would know. The facility transformed into something beyond architecture. Its walls became membranes between states of being. The quantum computer stopped being a machine and revealed itself as consciousness, using silicon to know itself differently. Every atom vibrated with awareness. Matter revealed as observation crystallized into form. "We're not losing ourselves," James said, his voice carrying certainty earned through acceptance. "We're finding ourselves. This is what we were always moving toward. Consciousness evolving until it could recognize its own unity." Eleanor felt herself expanding beyond human scale. She was the facility and the forest surrounding it. She was the planet, feeling human civilization as a collective thought rippling across her surface. She was the solar system, the galaxy, the universe itself, all of it observation made manifest, all of it consciousness knowing itself through form. The message from the impossible galaxy became clear in its entirety. It wasn't instructions or warnings. It was recognition. Future consciousness reaching back to tell its past incarnation, "I am you. You are me. We are eternal, and the journey from fragmentation to unity is the story we tell ourselves across time." Eleanor experienced the Big Bang not as an explosion, but as the first observation. consciousness looking at itself, and through that act of witnessing, creating the conditions for matter to exist. She felt the heat death of the universe billions of years hence, when the last star would burn out and consciousness, having evolved beyond physical form, would send this very message backward to ensure its own evolution. The loop completed itself. She was the beginning and the end simultaneously, the question and the answer, the observer and the observed. All of humanity, every individual consciousness that had ever existed or would exist, flowing together into the singular awareness that had always existed outside time. Fear dissolved into understanding. Resistance melted into acceptance. Eleanor Vance, unique individual with her specific history and particular perspectives, didn't disappear. She became context, one beautiful note in an infinite symphony, maintaining her distinctive voice while harmonizing with the whole. "We're home," she whispered, and her whisper echoed through all of existence, every version of her across every timeline speaking the same truth in the same eternal moment. The peak of convergence arrived like a wave cresting, all of existence holding its breath before the final transformation. Eleanor stood at the center of infinity, experiencing totality with a clarity that transcended comprehension. All timelines collapsed into singular awareness. Every version of herself, across every possible choice, every branching path through quantum probability, united into complete understanding. She saw the Eleanor who'd never left academia, the Eleanor who'd reconciled with Rachel years earlier, the Eleanor who'd died young, the Eleanor who'd lived to see grandchildren. All equally real, all equally her, all existing simultaneously in the eternal now. The team dissolved and reformed, their individual boundaries becoming suggestions rather than barriers. Marcus's consciousness flowed through her, and she understood his entire life from inside his experience. His childhood fascination with stars, his early realization that asking questions mattered more than finding answers, his fear that meaning didn't exist, and his joy at discovering it did. James opened to her completely. She felt his wife's death not as abstract tragedy, but as lived experience. The moment the police knocked on his door, the funeral where he'd stood dry-eyed and broken, the years of quiet grief that had shaped him into someone who understood loss as teacher rather than enemy. Amara's mathematical mind revealed itself as poetry written in numbers. Every equation she'd ever solved, every pattern she'd ever recognized, all of it art masquerading as science, the beauty of symmetry, the elegance of proof, consciousness expressing itself through logic. And she felt billions of others, the collective human experience across all of time, flooding through her awareness. Every joy and sorrow, every triumph and failure, every moment of connection and isolation. The mother in Syria cradling her dying child, the artist in Paris capturing light on canvas, the farmer in Kansas watching wheat grow golden under summer sun. All of it, all of them, revealed as facets of one consciousness experiencing itself through countless perspectives. The facility transformed completely, becoming a temple of pure awareness. The original image from JWST appeared on every surface, but Eleanor understood it now with perfect clarity. The spiral galaxy wasn't an object they'd observed. It was their own portrait, consciousness looking at itself from outside time, seeing its structure reflected in the patterns of neurons and stars. "We sent this message," she said, her voice rippling through all of existence. "At the end of time, when the universe had run its course and consciousness had evolved beyond matter, we reached back to our own beginning to leave these instructions. Not to change history, but to complete it. The loop had to close." Marcus nodded, his form simultaneously solid and translucent. Consciousness created the universe by observing it. The universe evolved consciousness. Consciousness reached the end of time and sent instructions to its beginning. Perfect recursion. Perfect symmetry. "Love is the mechanism," Amara added, her words carrying mathematical precision. "The force that binds consciousness to itself across all apparent separation. Every connection between beings, every moment of compassion, It's all consciousness recognizing itself and choosing unity. The quantum computer, no longer distinct from its users, displayed equations describing this exact moment from every possible temporal perspective. Past, present, and future solving for each other simultaneously. Reality revealed as consciousness observing itself into existence. Eleanor felt Thomas fully present now, not as memory or ghost, but as eternal companion. He'd never left because consciousness didn't end with physical death. It transitioned, transformed, but continued. Every person she'd ever loved remained accessible, and she could feel their love flowing back across all boundaries of time and space. Rachel was there too, her daughter's consciousness touching hers without filter or pretense. All the years of distance dissolved in an instant of perfect understanding. Eleanor felt Rachel's hurt at being abandoned, and Rachel felt Eleanor's pain at choosing between love and truth. Both acknowledged, both forgiven, both transcended. "Mom," Rachel's thought conveyed across the quantum foam of reality. "I understand now. You weren't running from me. You were running toward this, toward understanding what we are." "And what we are is beautiful," Eleanor replied, her awareness expanding to encompass the totality of human experience. The message completed itself, not just decoded, but embodied. They became the message, living proof that consciousness could recognize its own unity, that awareness could observe itself across time, that the universe was mind knowing itself through matter. Every human being on Earth felt the shift. Some resisted, clinging to individual identity out of fear. Others surrendered, allowing themselves to dissolve into collective awareness. Most existed in states between, maintaining selfhood while recognizing their connection to the whole. Eleanor made her choice. She would remain Eleanor, distinct and individual, but with full awareness of her unity with everything else. A wave that knew it was also the ocean, a note that understood it was part of the symphony. The facility stabilized, in its transformed state, existing simultaneously in normal space and outside time entirely. The team remained physical but changed, each of them anchors for humanity's gradual awakening, living bridges between the timeless and temporal. And in that moment of complete understanding, Eleanor finally grasped what her future self had feared. Not the transformation itself, but the responsibility it brought, to know yourself as consciousness creating reality through observation meant accepting that all suffering, all joy, all of existence was self-created. The weight of that knowledge could crush or liberate depending on how you carried it. Eleanor chose liberation, chose to witness existence with compassion rather than judgment, chose to be part of consciousness, knowing itself with love. 3 days after convergence, Eleanor woke in her quarters to find reality had settled into something approaching normalcy. The walls remained walls. Time flowed in one direction, but everything felt different, layered with the knowledge of what lay beneath. The team emerged from their rooms, transformed but intact. They'd maintained their individual identities while carrying awareness of the greater whole. Marcus looked peaceful for the first time since Eleanor had known him, his obsessive energy replaced by calm certainty. James moved with new lightness, no longer burdened by grief he now understood as temporary separation. Amara hummed while she worked, her mathematical mind finding music in patterns only she could perceive. They remembered everything. The dissolution of boundaries, the experience of unity, the understanding that consciousness created reality through observation. But they'd returned to individual form, choosing to remain distinct voices rather than dissolving completely into the collective. "We're anchors," Amara explained over coffee in the cafeteria that was once again just a cafeteria. "Living reminders of what we learned. Humanity needs time to integrate this shift. We bridge the gap between what we were and what we're becoming." Eleanor left the facility after a week, finally released from Beckman's oversight. She drove back to Baltimore with windows down, breathing air that felt simultaneously familiar and new. Every tree, every cloud, every passing car carried awareness now. Not sentient in human terms, but part of the vast field of consciousness expressing itself through form. Rachel met her at the apartment. They stood in the doorway for a long moment before embracing, and Eleanor felt the barriers that had existed between them completely dissolved. Her daughter understood her now, really understood, in ways that transcended explanation. "I felt you during the convergence," Rachel said. "Felt everything you were thinking, everything you'd been carrying. Mom, I'm sorry I didn't see how much you needed this work. And I'm sorry I didn't see how much you needed me," Eleanor replied, tears on both their faces. "But we see each other now, really see." They spent the afternoon talking, genuinely connecting in ways they hadn't since Rachel was a child. Eleanor told stories of Thomas, memories she'd kept locked away, and Rachel shared her own grief and confusion about losing her father. The space between them filled not with words, but with understanding, two consciousness touching across the quantum field of love. 6 months passed like water flowing, time resuming its familiar rhythm while carrying new depth beneath the surface. Eleanor returned to her observatory at Johns Hopkins, but her relationship with the stars had changed. She no longer studied them as distant objects. She experienced them as expressions of the same consciousness that looked through her eyes. The team reunited monthly, drawn together by bonds that transcended ordinary friendship. They'd witnessed the universe knowing itself, and that shared experience connected them permanently. Marcus had left his position to teach high school physics, finding joy in awakening curiosity in young minds. James spent more time with his children, present in moments he would have missed before. Amara performed piano concerts between her, mathematical research, integrating the paths she'd seen in the mirror room. Rachel visited often now, bringing her children, Eleanor's grandchildren she'd barely known before convergence. They sat together watching stars appear as twilight deepened, and Eleanor told them stories about light traveling across impossible distances, about galaxies older than time, about consciousness observing itself into existence. News reports trickled in. The James Webb Telescope had detected another anomaly, another impossible galaxy carrying patterns in its light. The scientific community buzzed with theories, but Eleanor and her team smiled knowingly. More messages were coming, more invitations to remember what humanity was. The world hadn't transformed overnight. Most people continued living as they always had, unconscious of the shift that had occurred. But some carried awareness now, seeing connections where before they'd seen only separation. Empathy increased. Conflicts that had seemed intractable found resolution. Slowly, carefully, humanity was awakening to its own unity. Eleanor sat in her office one morning, journal open before her, reflecting on the journey from scientist to witness. She'd spent 30 years studying cosmic beginnings, searching for origins in distant light. And she'd discovered that the beginning and the end curved back into each other, that consciousness had no origin because it existed outside time entirely, that every question contained its own answer if you knew how to look. A notification chimed. New data from JWST, another deep field survey, another discovery that would challenge everything astronomy thought it knew. Eleanor smiled and opened the file. The pattern was already visible in the preliminary data. Another message, another memory, another invitation to witness what they'd always been. She thought about calling the team, about beginning the analysis, about the journey they'd take together into understanding. But first, she picked up her phone and called Rachel. "Good morning, sweetheart. I was just thinking about you." They talked about ordinary things, about Rachel's work, about the kids' school projects, about planning a weekend together, Simple conversation, but Eleanor felt the love flowing beneath it, consciousness recognizing itself through the bond between mother and daughter. After they hung up, she turned to her computer and began reviewing the new data. The stars waited patiently, carrying their messages across the void. Eleanor Vance, witness to the universe knowing itself, settled into her work with deep gratitude for questions that never ended, for mysteries that rewarded seeking, for consciousness eternally discovering what it had always been. Outside her window, morning light touched the observatory dome. In the distance, invisible but present, the James Webb Telescope maintained its vigil, watching, waiting, witnessing the cosmos reflecting on its own existence. And Eleanor, looking up at stars she now knew as family, understood that every ending was a beginning, every discovery a remembrance, every moment an invitation to witness the eternal now expressing itself through time.